Madison twirled her fork through the pasta on her plate, her expression smooth, controlled. The candlelight flickered over her sharp features, illuminating the hint of a smirk at the corner of her lips. She was enjoying this, the illusion of control, the power of being the one to dictate the next chapter of our marriage. "I think we should try an open relationship," she said, her voice light, almost playful, as if she hadn't just thrown a grenade into the foundation of our 15-year marriage. I paused my fork halfway to my mouth, willing my pulse to remain steady. I had prepared myself for many things over the years. Madison's impatience, her ever-wandering restlessness, her habit of pushing boundaries just to see how far she could go. But this, she was watching me closely, searching for that flicker of resistance, the protest she was expecting, maybe even hoping for, because that would mean I still cared enough to fight for her, to keep her caged in the comfort of my devotion. Instead, I did something she didn't expect. I smiled. "You know what?" I said, setting my fork down with deliberate ease. "That actually sounds fair." For the first time since she spoke, her composure cracked. It was brief, a half-second hesitation, a blink too long, but I caught it. She thought I would push back. She thought I would break. I wouldn't. Madison quickly recovered, letting out a soft laugh as if this was all part of her carefully calculated plan. "I knew you'd understand. I mean, we're still us, right? This would just be an exploration." I leaned back in my chair, studying her, the way she held herself with such certainty, the way she truly believed she was the one in control of this game. But I wasn't about to play the fool. "If that's what you want," I said smoothly, lifting my wine glass to my lips, "then that's exactly what we'll do." She relaxed then, assured that she had won, that I had given in. She had no idea, because what Madison didn't understand was that when you open the door to freedom, you don't always get to decide who walks through it, or who walks away for good. Madison carried herself with the same effortless confidence she always had, gliding through the days that followed our conversation as if she had just successfully negotiated the terms of our marriage in her favor. She assumed the hard part was over, that I had accepted my role in her new reality. She had no idea that from the moment I agreed, I had already begun taking back my power. I didn't bring it up again, didn't ask questions, didn't act suspicious or insecure. If anything, I acted as if nothing had changed. That, I knew, would lull her into a false sense of security. She had expected resistance, maybe even anger, but not this. Not my calm, composed acceptance. The first few weeks, she tiptoed around the subject, waiting for signs that I might lash out, that I might snap and tell her I had changed my mind. But I didn't. Instead, I was patient, watching her, learning her new patterns. She started dressing a little differently, sleek, sophisticated, but with just enough edge to suggest she was on the prowl. She spent longer getting ready, selecting outfits that flattered her body in ways she hadn't cared to before. I noticed the way her phone was always within reach, how she angled it slightly when she received messages, a flicker of excitement in her eyes when she thought I wasn't paying attention, and I let her believe I wasn't paying attention. Meanwhile, I made my own moves, not out of spite, but out of necessity. If this marriage was to become an open field, then I had no intention of standing in the shadows while she danced in the light. So I reconnected with myself, with the version of me that had been buried beneath years of loyalty to a woman who had taken me for granted. I spent more time at the gym reclaiming the strength that had once defined me. I re-engaged with old friends, the ones I had unintentionally distanced myself from in my years of being Madison's steady, predictable husband. I said yes to invitations I would have previously declined, no longer waiting at home like some forgotten relic while my wife explored her newfound freedom. The first time Madison realized something was different, it was subtle, a shift she couldn't quite put her finger on. I wasn't questioning her comings and goings. I wasn't waiting up for her. I wasn't falling into my usual patterns of predictability. She started to notice when I came home late, showered after dinner, dressed sharper even on casual days. Then came the night she saw me at a bar. Not our usual spot, but one we had been to before. She had just arrived with a friend when her eyes landed on me across the room standing at the bar, engaged in easy conversation with a woman. She was laughing at something I said, her hand lightly brushing against my forearm. I didn't see Madison at first, but when I did, I made sure to hold her gaze for just a second longer than necessary before returning my attention to the conversation. No guilt, no hesitation, no fear. That was the moment the doubt crept in for her, because, for the first time, she realized she might not be the only one enjoying this new arrangement. And that was exactly what I wanted. Madison always believed she held the reins in our marriage. She had built a comfortable illusion for herself, one where I was the unwavering constant, the reliable foundation she could step away from and return to whenever she pleased. That illusion had begun to crack the night she saw me at the bar. At first, she tried to dismiss it. After all, I was just talking to another woman, nothing more. But the way I carried myself, the ease in my body language, the quiet confidence in my expression, it was different. It was something she hadn't seen in me for years, and it unsettled her. She didn't say anything right away. That wasn't Madison's style. She preferred to believe she was in control of the narrative, that she was the one guiding this new dynamic between us. But I knew her too well. I saw the way her eyes lingered on me more often, the subtle tension in her jaw when I left the house without offering an explanation. She started texting more, calling at unexpected times, things she had never done before. "Where are you?" she asked one evening when I picked up the phone. I could hear the forced casualness in her voice, the effort to sound indifferent. "Just grabbing dinner," I replied simply, knowing full well that vagueness would gnaw at her. "With who?" I smiled to myself, letting a small pause stretch between us. "Some friends." She hesitated, and I could hear the gears turning in her head. "Okay, well, don't be too late." I didn't bother reassuring her, didn't feed into the game she was trying to play. I had learned something valuable in these past few weeks. Madison thrived on control. The moment she felt like she was losing it, she would scramble to regain it, and that's exactly what was happening. She started making an effort, subtle at first, wearing perfume she hadn't used in years, dressing a little nicer even when we were just at home. She reached for me more often, initiating small touches, little gestures of affection that had become rare in recent years. One night, she climbed under my lap while we were watching TV, something she hadn't done since our early years together. She draped her arms around my shoulders, pressing close, as if she could anchor herself to me before I drifted too far. "I missed you today," she murmured, her lips brushing against my ear. I simply smiled, wrapping my arms around her waist, but I didn't give her what she was looking for. No reassurance, no eagerness to reciprocate the affection she had so carelessly withheld from me before. Madison was starting to realize what I had known all along. She had mistaken my devotion for dependence. She had believed I would always be there, no matter what, but now the possibility of losing me was becoming real to her, and it scared her. The final confirmation of that came a week later. I had just returned home from a night out when I found her sitting at the kitchen island waiting for me. Her arms were crossed, and she was sipping from a glass of wine. Classic Madison, always needing the upper hand in conversations. "You've been going out a lot lately," she said, her voice measured but laced with something she was trying hard to conceal. "Yeah," I said, grabbing a bottle of water from the fridge. "I guess I have." She exhaled sharply, setting her glass down with a little too much force. "With anyone in particular?" I turned to face her, meeting her gaze without hesitation. "Why do you ask?" She blinked, caught off guard by my directness. "Because I want to know." I took a sip of water, leaning against the counter. You wanted an open relationship, Madison? I assumed that meant you weren't interested in what I do anymore?" The color drained from her face for a split second before she masked it with a tight smile. "That's not what I meant." I tilted my head slightly, studying her. "Then what did you mean?" She hesitated. This was unfamiliar territory for her. She wasn't used to being the one feeling uncertain, feeling like she was on the losing end of the conversation. Finally, she sighed, pushing her wine glass away. "I don't know, I just—" She stopped herself, her fingers curling into her palms. I let the silence hang between us, not offering her an easy way out, because this was what she had asked for. She had wanted freedom, but now that I'd taken mine, she wasn't so sure anymore. She had assumed that I would stay put, that I would remain hers even as she explored other options. She had never imagined a world where I moved forward without looking back. And now that she was starting to see it, she was realizing something else too. She might open the door first, but I was the one walking through it, without hesitation. And for the first time, Madison was the one left standing behind. Madison had always assumed that she would be the one steering this arrangement, the one setting the terms, the one with the power to decide when to engage and when to retreat. She thought she could dabble in excitement while keeping the stability of her marriage intact, as if I would sit patiently on the sidelines waiting for her to return. But something had shifted. I wasn't waiting anymore. She noticed it in small ways at first. The way I no longer asked about her plans. The way I didn't check in when she was out late. The way I stopped reacting. Stopped chasing. Stopped looking at her as though she were the center of my world. And that realization unsettled her more than anything else. One evening, I was getting ready to head out, buttoning up a crisp shirt, when she leaned against the door frame, watching me. She wasn't dressed to go anywhere, which meant she was home for the night. That used to mean something. Before, if she stayed in, she expected me to do the same. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice light, but there was an edge to it, a tension she was trying to suppress. I glanced at her briefly in the mirror as I adjusted my collar. "Out!" She frowned slightly, as if waiting for me to elaborate, to give her some indication that she still had a claim on me. When I didn't, she pushed off the doorframe and stepped into the room. "With who?" I turned to face her, meeting her gaze evenly. "Does it matter?" Something flickered in her eyes, something that told me she wasn't as comfortable with this new version of me as she had expected to be. "It's just, you've been going out a lot lately, and you're dressing up more." I smiled slightly, but it wasn't the reassuring smile she was hoping for. "Shouldn't I? You're the one who suggested we see other people." Her lips parted as if she had something to say, but she hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I didn't think that meant we just drift apart." I chuckled, shaking my head slightly. "You thought we could do this and stay exactly the same?" She folded her arms across her chest, an old defensive habit. "I thought we would be honest with each other." Honesty. That was rich, coming from her. "I have been honest," I said, stepping past her to grab my keys from the dresser. "I told you I was okay with this. You assumed that meant I would just sit still while you explored." Her jaw tightened, her fingers gripping her arms a little too hard. "That's not fair." I turned back to her, my expression calm. "Isn't it?" She had nothing to say to that. I saw it then, the creeping doubt in her eyes, the uncertainty settling into her features like an unwelcome guest. She had spent so much time reveling in the freedom she thought she had gained that she had never considered the cost. She had believed she was in control of this arrangement, but the moment she realized she wasn't, the rules didn't seem quite so appealing anymore. That night as I left, I felt her eyes on me, the weight of her gaze heavy with something she wouldn't say out loud. Regret, and that was just the beginning. The next day, she was waiting for me when I came home from work. The smell of my favorite meal filled the air, the kind of small gesture she hadn't made in years. She was wearing the dress I had once told her she looked beautiful in, her makeup subtle but carefully done. It was a performance, but I let her play it. "Long day?" she asked casually as I set my keys down. I nodded, moving past her toward the kitchen, but she followed, lingering closer than usual. "I was thinking," she continued, watching me carefully, "maybe we should have a night together. Just." I raised an eyebrow, turning to face her fully. "Just us?" She nodded, a small, hesitant smile on her lips. "We haven't really spent much time together lately." And there it was, the moment she realized she had made a mistake. I let the silence stretch just long enough for her to feel it before I spoke. "I thought you wanted space." Her smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. "I do. I just think maybe we should check in with each other too." I tilted my head slightly, studying her. "You mean, now that you see I'm actually enjoying my freedom, you want to pull me back in?" Her breath hit slightly, but she masked it with a soft laugh. "That's not what I'm saying." I stepped closer, just enough to see the uncertainty flicker in her eyes. "Madison," I said smoothly, "you made the rules. Don't look so surprised that I'm playing by them." She opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't give her the chance. Instead, I leaned in, pressed a light kiss to her cheek, and whispered, "Enjoy your freedom." Then I walked away. And for the first time, Madison was left with exactly what she had asked for. The unraveling of Madison's illusion wasn't immediate. It was slow, creeping into the cracks she hadn't noticed forming until they had already spread too far to be ignored. At first, she tried to deny it, pretending things were fine, that she still had control, that this was just a temporary shift in her dynamic. But deep down, she knew. She had already lost the one thing she thought she could always count on. Me. The night everything came crashing down for her was one I won't forget. It was a Friday, and I had made plans, just like I had for the past several weekends. I was dressed in a sharp, tailored suit, exuding confidence in a way I hadn't in years. The man who had once waited around, hoping to be enough for his wife, no longer existed. As I was adjusting my watch, Madison leaned against the bedroom doorframe much like she had before. But this time she wasn't trying to pry casually. This time the tension in her eyes was impossible to hide. "You going out again?" she asked, though we both knew the answer. I grabbed my jacket, slipping it on with ease. "Yeah." "With who?" I smiled slightly, shaking my head. "You keep asking that, Madison." She pushed off the doorframe, her arms crossed over her chest, Because you keep avoiding the question. I met her gaze, my expression unreadable. Because the answer doesn't matter. For the first time she dropped the act, it matters to me. I let out a slow breath, running a hand through my hair. She hesitated, searching for an answer she could give without making herself too vulnerable. But there wasn't one. You're my husband, she finally said, her voice quieter now. It's not that I... She paused, shaking her head as if trying to gather her thoughts. I didn't think it would feel like this. I chuckled, though there was no humor in it. Like what? She swallowed hard, her fingers gripping her arms a little too tightly. Like, I'm losing you? I studied her for a long moment, letting her words settle between us. Then I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. Her breath hitched slightly as I reached out, trailing my fingers along her jaw, an intimate gesture that once would have meant everything to her. Then I dropped my hand, stepping back. Madison, I said smoothly, my voice calm, steady. You lost me the moment you thought I was something you could put on a shelf and take down when it suited you. Her eyes glistened, but she blinked quickly, refusing to let the tears fall. Ethan, she whispered, her voice pleading now. I don't want this anymore. I tilted my head slightly as if considering her words. That's the thing about choices, Madison. You don't always get to take them back. She shook her head, reaching for my hand. Please, we can fix this. I exhaled, squeezing her hand for just a moment before gently pulling away. No, Madison, I said, my voice unwavering. You wanted freedom. Enjoy it. And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the home we had built together. The home she had thought would always be filled with my presence, no matter what choices she made. As I stepped outside, the night air felt crisp, refreshing. It was strange, the sense of finality that came with this moment. But it wasn't painful, it wasn't regretful. It was freeing. For the first time in years, I wasn't tied to someone who had taken me for granted. I wasn't waiting for love that had already withered. Madison had thought she could have it all. She had never considered what would happen when she realized that in chasing her version of freedom, she had lost the only thing that truly mattered.